Point 1. God is not a man. In Hosea 11:9 it is very plainly stated that God is not a man. This teaching is reinforced in Numbers 23:19, Job 9:32, and 1 Samuel 15:29. The idea that God would one day appear on earth as a man is a matter of tremendous significance. If this were truly the case, it stands to reason that such an event would have been foretold, as Amos 3:7 states that God reveals his plans to the prophets. However, there is not a single prophecy in the Old Testament indicating that God would ever manifest on earth in human form. These facts should be enough to reassure the sincere truth seeker that God is not a man and never appeared on earth as a human, which in turn demolishes the idea that Jesus was God in human form. Only a stubborn fool would believe that God, after saying he is not a man or the Son of Man, would then come to earth as a man and go around calling himself the Son of Man. Point 2. Jesus distinguished himself from God. We can be certain that Jesus isn't God because he distinguished himself from God by making statements like, my God, why have you forsaken me? I ascend to my God and your God. You have believed in God, believe also in me. Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone, etc. These sayings by Jesus prove that he was not only distinct from God, but also subject to him, and therefore not God. One needs to suspend common sense and the rules of grammar and logic to read these statements and conclude that Jesus was actually God. Point 3. Jesus is called man and Son of Man. In John 8:40, during a conversation with the Pharisees, Jesus calls himself a man. In Mark 2:10, Matthew 8:20, and many other places, Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, a phrase that does not apply to God. As we noted earlier, God is neither a man nor the Son of Man. So when Jesus refers to himself as a man and Son of Man, it follows that he did not intend for anyone to regard him as God. If God isn't a man, and if Jesus distinguished himself from God and called himself a man, it would be illogical to still conclude that Jesus was God. Furthermore, the authors of Matthew and Mark also refer to Jesus as a man and Son of Man. See Matthew 9:8 and Mark 8:31. They make no effort to clarify that Jesus was actually God in human form, which indicates that they neither believed Jesus was God, nor intended to convey that idea. Even after Jesus' ascension to heaven, none of the disciples ever attempted to teach that Jesus was actually God. In Acts 2:22-23, Peter describes his master Jesus as a man accredited by God. And in the next verse, Peter once again calls him a man. Similarly, in Acts 17:31, Peter refers to Jesus as a man appointed by God. Peter never suggests anywhere that Jesus was God in human form, indicating that he neither believed Jesus was God nor intended to convey that idea. Point 4. Jesus is called a servant of God. In Matthew 12, the author connects Isaiah 42, which is a prophecy about a future servant of God, to Jesus. And in Acts 3:13, after Jesus' ascension to heaven, Peter refers to Jesus as a servant of God. This once again proves Peter neither believed Jesus was God, nor intended to convey that idea. You don't need a PhD in theology to understand that a servant of God cannot also be God. Point 5. Jesus is called rabbi and teacher. Jesus is consistently referred to as a rabbi and teacher throughout the four Gospels. In passages like Mark 9:5, John 9:2, and John 4:31, his disciples address him as rabbi. Similarly, in Mark 4:38 and Luke 7:40, they call him teacher, which is the Aramaic equivalent of rabbi. And in numerous places, we read that people referred to Jesus as a teacher and rabbi. This repeated emphasis on him being a rabbi and teacher clearly shows that Jesus was a human being, not God. Point 6. Jesus is called a prophet. Jesus identified himself as a prophet in Mark 6:4. Jesus was also regarded as a prophet by the people who heard his words and witnessed his miracles firsthand. See John 6:14, Luke 24:19, Matthew 21:11. Jesus never once clarified that he was God in addition to being a prophet. Similarly, the writers of those documents did not argue that he was both God and a prophet. Common sense dictates that a prophet of God cannot himself be God. Point 7. Jesus is called Son of David. In Matthew 1:1, Matthew 9:27, and Matthew 21:9, Jesus is referred to as the Son of David. In Luke 1:32, David is mentioned as Jesus' father, indicating that Jesus was just one of David's many descendants. If Jesus is God as Christians believe, they must also accept that David is the ancestor of God, which is ridiculous to even think about. Point 8. Jesus is called the Messiah. In John 4, while speaking with the Samaritan woman, Jesus affirms that he is the Messiah. In Mark 8:29, Jesus asks his disciples who they believe he is, and Peter replies, "You are the Messiah." This story also appears in Matthew and Luke. In Matthew 16:16, Peter's answer is, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," while in Luke 9:20, Peter calls Jesus God's Messiah. In all three accounts, Jesus affirms that Peter is correct without ever mentioning that he is also God. Additionally, during his trial, Jesus confirms his identity as the Messiah. In Mark 14, Matthew 26, and Luke 22, the Pharisees ask him directly if he is the Messiah, and Jesus responds affirmatively. The point is that if Jesus was God in addition to being the Messiah, he had several opportunities to make that fact known. Since he never did, we can safely conclude that he was not God and never intended to teach such an idea. Point 9. Jesus' birth and infancy. If Jesus was indeed God in the flesh, that should have been made clear in the many passages pertaining to his birth and infancy. However, none of them describe Jesus as God or God in the flesh. Instead, Jesus is referred to as the Messiah, the Son of David, the Savior, etc. Point 10. Jesus was seen by many. Jesus was a public figure, meaning he was seen by many. And if Jesus was God, then it logically follows that many people saw God. Yet, in 1 John 4:12, the Apostle John writes that no one has seen God. The implication of this is that John never regarded his master Jesus, whom he saw daily for 3 years, as God. Similarly, in 1 Timothy 6:15-16, Paul also states that no one has seen God, indicating that he too did not believe Jesus was God. Point 11. Jesus taught that the Father is God. Jesus makes it clear that it's the Father who is the only true God, and that it's the Father who is to be worshipped, prayed to, and obeyed. This eliminates the idea that Jesus, also known as the Son, is God. See John 17:3, Matthew 6:6-9, John 4:23, Matthew 26:39, and Matthew 7:21. In conclusion, not only does Jesus never refer to himself as God, he repeatedly identified himself in human terms like man, Son of Man, and Messiah. He distinguishes himself from God and clearly teaches that the Father is God. Furthermore, those who knew Jesus personally and wrote about him referred to him as man, Rabbi, Son of David, Messiah, Prophet, Servant of God, etc. If Jesus was really God, those men had many chances to say so, but they never did. Simply put, there is nothing in the Bible, not even a footnote, that suggests Jesus was God. Thus, the view that Jesus is not God is solid theology based on the biblical teaching that God is not a man and the Bible's consistent portrayal of Jesus as a human agent of God. The Bible is screaming at us that Jesus is a man, not God. One would have to be extremely delusional and hopelessly stubborn to reject this ocean of evidence and still insist that Jesus was God.